hand you over to Liam to start this evening's presentation. Liam, great, thanks.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Liam, as Anita just said, and on behalf of Valerie, myself and the team, I'd like to warmly welcome you all to our webinar this evening. And I do hope you find it useful as you prepare to teach the new Leaving Cert Geography course, which begins in September, of course, for everybody. Now, you might still be considering a choice of textbook, and if you are, much of what we will be referring to this evening will be from our new textbook core, which we've not so subtly put here on our display, advertising it at the moment. So just to go through the agenda for this evening, so we'll give you a brief overview of the new Leaving Cert Geography course to start. For any of you who still might be, unsure or uninitiated with it, I know a lot of you may have been kind of doing EDGE or whatever courses, but anyone that still hasn't got that, we'll have a quick look through that. Then obviously the main part of the topic, which is why you're here, what is geopolitics and how does it fit into the whole Leaving Cert Geography course. We'll look at the learning outcomes and the learning intentions for geopolitics. And obviously to give you some idea of what is the content, what is in geopolitics, what do we cover in the book and in general in the specification. So we'll walk you through some of the content briefly, obviously, here tonight, just to give you a taster of it. I want to focus then on how you might approach teaching learning outcome 3.13, which is about the influence of superpowers such as the United States or indeed China, some might even argue the EU as well, and how they have come to prominence and indeed be of such significant influence throughout the world as we're seeing now and in the past and more than likely in the future as well. We'll look at some of the pedagogical approaches that you might like to take on board in teaching this. We'll give you some ideas of methodologies and obviously some resources that we might be able to recommend you to use for this evening. And then we'll address at the very, very end the whole area of assessment. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of crystal ball gazing because we're still awaiting the SEC to release their sample papers, which I'm told is supposed to be very, very soon in April. But from talking to my colleagues in the SEC and looking at obviously the release of Tranche 1 exam papers, we have some idea already of the type and style of questioning that is likely to come up, and we'll address that as well. So plenty to cover this evening, so let's get going. Okay, so just to talk a little bit about the new specification. So obviously this is our Bible that everything is built on. So this was released, the final draft of it was released in September 2026. And if you have any familiarity with the old Leaving Cert course, or indeed even if you haven't and you've taught the new Junior Cert course, there are some changes because there is no longer any choice between the core, elective and option sections. So now the students have to study the whole course. So there's no longer, as I said, choice. However, we have noticed that despite the fact that there is obviously less choice, some sections have been slimmed down, and we'll address them as we go on. Now, also, when we talk about assessment, as we just have done, you will notice that the written exam is now worth 60% of the entire course rather than the old 80%, which the outgoing Leaving Cert was. And the Applied Geography project, which replaces the old Geographical Investigation, which used to be worth 20%, is now worth 40%. So I suppose essentially we're talking about a project that used to take probably about 500 words in a report that now is going to be 1,500 words. And of course, that's going to be across the board in all senior cycle subjects as we go forward. So geography is no different to that. You'll also notice if you've looked through the spec that the course is divided now into 4 sections or strands. So obviously there's a unifying strand that runs right through the whole thing called geographical thinking and skills, which is very, very important. And it actually runs right through all the other strands, and it builds up the students' skills and map reading and analysis and data gathering and so on, so that they can showcase it at the very, very end of the course through both the questions in the Leaving Cert Geography exam and, of course, the Applied Geography project as well. So we'll look a little bit at that too as we go along. And of course, no surprise at all to anybody that's familiar with the new junior cycle. This is just basically aligning now with the new junior cycle, where all sections of the strand in the course has a series of learning outcomes that are numbered that students must fulfill at the end of each strand. Okay, so looking at the course structure here, a little bit more in more detail. Yeah, you can see that we've put the unifying strand here front and center because as was dictated to by the specification, it says that they particularly were interested in students basically applying their geographical thinking and skills in a critical manner, in a way that they can analyze and gather data and eventually obviously decide on conclusions and obviously before even the deciding conclusions, formulating geographical questions. So as you can see here in the book, what we think is a very unique selling point is we've actually decided that we would put the four chapters that cover the unifying strand first and obviously intertwine them then in all the other sections throughout the book, which would build up the students' ability to practice their geo skills, obviously map reading, aerial photographs, satellite imagery, quite an emphasis now on the digital geographical information systems. And then obviously all of that will build up over time. And at the end then, when the students are actually carrying out their applied geography project, they're able to easily slot in all of that information to come up with a comprehensive and very well constructed project. So as you can see, strand 1, which I suppose contains a whole lot of old chestnuts such as plate tectonics, fall mountains, the rock cycle, rivers, coasts, glaciers, and you can see then that brought into this now a bit, I suppose, to line up with the new junior cycle is the whole area of atmosphere and weather and climate and climate change as well now, which wasn't on the old Leaving Cert Geography course, except as an option under atmosphere, ocean, environment, and maybe a little bit as well in the economic elective. But as I said, it was easily an area that teachers could easily miss or avoid if they chose other sections, but that's no longer the case. So the same in strand 2, where we cover the human environment now, has, I suppose, things like urban studies, population, migration, and as we move on through, you'll begin to realise that the whole element of sustainability and how we plan around modern cities and modern settlements comes into play in this as well. And then we come on to strand 3, which is what covers this section, geopolitics, and the whole area of the global environment, which covers learning outcomes 3.1 to 3.14. And we have things like, for example, the old economic sections like agriculture and tourism, but now you're bringing in the whole area of globalization and, of course, the very significant and very relevant geopolitics section as well. So we try to sort of like structure the book in a manner which is run seamlessly from the unifying strand through strand 1 to 3, while at the same time intertwining all the geo skills, all the very important geo skills that we could get that will run right through. Okay, so on to geopolitics, I guess. So what is geopolitics for anyone that might be still unsure? I'm sure you have a kind of a broad idea of what it might be, but obviously being so relevant at the moment and in the news with what's happening out in the Gulf with the USA and Israel attacking Iran and, the supply of oil and everything being cut off, it has really kind of come to the fore. And I suppose when I'm often talking to students in school, we kind of refer to the whole area of like the revenge of geography as was put. So what is geopolitics? It's concerned with how states or governments, known as actors, interact with each other. So really it's kind of like international relations. And here you can see us bringing in the whole area of, I guess, was one of the first kind of important parts of the geo skills section is the idea of understanding the key concepts, bringing the key concepts back front and center, back to basics for students. So we mentioned things like interrelationship and interdependence between geography, which is essentially the location of a country, the demographics, how big the population is, the size of the population, the economics, which involves obviously trade and wealth of a country, the environment, such as we'd say, for example, whether it's a mountainous or a flat region, or whether it might have rivers running through it, navigable rivers perhaps, or fertile soils, and of course the whole decision making behind it, the laws, the regulations, the politics. And as you can see quite clearly here, we try to incorporate all of these into our book core. So, for example, here in this particular page, you can see that we have the key theme, which is quite important because this is an area where a lot of essays or questions might be based around. So immediately it gets the teacher and the student into thinking, well, if I cover all of this, can I answer a question or can I discuss a question around the key theme? And obviously we include all the learning outcomes as well as, of course, the learning intention. And one of the things that we've moved from as well, and a lot of teachers have said it to me, we got a lot of feedback on it, is that at the beginning of a lot of packages, we tend to get a lot of keywords. But I find, I don't know, as a teacher, I find keywords, while they're useful at the very, very beginning of a lesson, when we haven't actually covered the keywords, they're not much use. So I think it's important that we define the most important words that you're going to come across in the topic, so that it makes life easier for the teacher and the student when they encounter a new concept. And then obviously we can work through the keywords towards the end as a kind of a part of a revision at the end of the unit. And this is something that's very important to us in core. We bring this front and center. Okay, so the learning intentions for geopolitics is very simple. So 3.12 is about to explore the concept and relevance of geopolitics. 3.13 is to outline the influence of superpowers in geopolitics. And of course, we're seeing that at the moment in the news, and pretty much front and center since Russia invaded Ukraine, and the whole sort of standoff between sort of the European Union as the frontier of it, and then you bring Russia and you bring the USA into it. And now, obviously, what's happening in Iran and the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, and all of this comes in as well. And then we bring in, of course, the whole area of China. And then finally, 3.14, we're looking at investigating a geopolitical territorial dispute. So the learning intentions are very similar, obviously, to the learning outcomes. They just put a little bit more detail on what students specifically need to know. So this is not something that we plucked idly out of the sky. I mean, if you look at the learning spec, you will see that there's two tables, one on the left-hand side, which basically says that students must learn about. So these are where we get the learning intentions. And then on the right-hand side, there are the numbered learning outcomes. So the learning intentions for this unit, a student must be able to, and you need to get this across to students, that they need to understand what geopolitics is, the concept of it. I think we've pretty much covered in the key theme at the very beginning, and to be able to define it, and then to be able to identify the factors that determine a country's status in the world, because obviously some countries are very powerful and very influential and can coerce other countries or make decisions that can have a huge knock-on effect globally in terms of trade, economics, or even the sheer quality of life of people. And so we need to look at that. And then we need to also understand that where you are located in the world, known as your geostrategic location, is also really, really important. It can lead to conflict, as we see in the Persian Gulf. Again, I suppose I keep referring back to that, but there's also places like, for example, along the Sahel region, where there's a lot of conflict as well. Whereas we'd say, for example, you could argue that our location in Ireland at the moment is a very peaceful geostrategic location on the western seaboard of Europe. Then we determine the connection between geography. Again, this is a definition, actually, that they need to understand that this is more than just a simple international relations. There's location, demographics, economics, environment, and politics all comes into play. We look at how the USA became a global superpower and how superpowers use both hard and soft power to influence other countries. And you'll see this obviously very, very quickly. A definition of hard power is pretty much using military or economic force to force people into doing certain things or thinking a certain way, whereas soft power is more using culture and I suppose, for want of a better word, quiet coercion in a kind of a different way, killing with kindness, you might argue, to influence other countries. And then we look at being able to identify and explain the causes, consequences, and responses to a territorial dispute. And in core, we cover India and Pakistan. Okay, so obviously, one of the big parts of this section or this unit is what are the factors that influences a country's status. So I would imagine that at the very, very beginning, when you're discussing this with students in your class, I know that this would be something that they wouldn't be unfamiliar with from even junior cycle level. But if a country basically scores highly on or ticks all the boxes in terms of these, then they're likely to have a higher status. So we're looking at things like, again, land size. I mean, the bigger the country is in terms of land size, the more likely it is to be powerful. The same with population size, although we can also see and show plenty of examples where large countries in size and population doesn't necessarily lead to a country having very high status. Certainly it helps if you have a big military power, as the United States are showing, and if you have access to vast resources. So obviously this is very, very topical at the moment, and this is an actual map that we've taken from the pages of our book, because we want to constantly refer to the idea that we use maps and visuals to stimulate discussion and also make students understand, locational geography. I suppose it had been seen as quite old-fashioned for quite a while, as making a big comeback. Your location on the map hasn't gone away, So a geostrategic location. I mean, the media is full of the importance of the Strait of Hormuz at the moment. I mean, 20% of all the oil, we know this for sure, comes from these states. It has to get through that very narrow 40-kilometer stretch through the Strait of Hormuz. We know that Iran controls a big section of it, and obviously, since the war started, they've closed it off. We've seen the spike in oil prices go absolutely through the roof. So, could you argue with your students that the Strait of Hormuz is not a vital geostrategic location? I don't think so. All right, but obviously there are other important geostrategic locations as well. So this is another graphic taken from the book. And if you can see the one on the right, which is kind of interesting, it seems to have kind of died down sort of in the last while because of what's happening in the Gulf. But the American and the USA's attempt, particularly led by Donald Trump, to try and gain control of Greenland. You can see that there are routes and there are resources, mineral resources, lots of rare earth minerals, in fact, located within the Arctic Circle, that the big superpowers of China, Russia, obviously the United States, want to get a hold of, and the Danes and the the European Union are not too keen on that happening, of course. So that has not ended. That is still hanging at the moment. It's just gone to the back of the sort of the consciousness because of the war in Iran at the moment. Okay, so obviously geopolitics had to come from somewhere. So the idea came from Rudolf Kjellin, who came up with the idea in 1899. He was a big sort of a follower of Friedrich Ratzel, who kind of had the same idea that the animal kingdom competes with each other, obviously, for resources and territory, and that countries behave much the same way. And then Mackinder, Halford Mackinder was a British geographer and politician. He also had the same idea. So he proposed the whole area of the Asian heartland. And he believed that any country that would dominate the Asian heartland would likely become a world superpower of huge influence. And of course, that led to a huge amount of interest and study in this area. And we kind of look at the brief history of this in our book in more detail. Now, not surprisingly, sometimes certain odious regimes, as the Nazis were seen as, can sit up and take notice. And unfortunately, led by Adolf Hitler, the Germans at the time, Nazi Germany, followed this to the nth degree, and decided to invade Czechoslovakia and Poland, which led to World War II. And obviously, after that, the whole idea of classical geopolitics, as it was then called, lost its popularity, and very little was said about it for at least until the 1980s. But of course, we know that it's not just about territory. There's a lot more factors that influences a country's status and development in the world today. I mean, by any stretch, anybody that looks at any list of countries in the world in terms of their economic development. Ireland certainly is high up there. I was only looking at a kind of a list, and I'll refer to it later on as one of the websites I use called Gapminder, where we're looking at the whole area of the development indicators of a country. And Ireland obviously is up there as second and third consistently for the last while. That didn't happen by accident, of course. Modern influences, such as we said, modern technology, the internet, social media, the influence of multinational corporations like Apple, have obviously contributed to our wealth and where we once were a relatively poor country. Now, we also cover, as we said, in this geopolitical territorial dispute, we focus on India and Pakistan simply because of the fact that it's easy to remember. There is a bit of a link between that and the old course. So teachers that would have taught it, it kind of saves them a little bit in terms of the workload. We also have a link as well, a cross-link between this and Chapter 20, which also covers India and population structure as well, which obviously takes away a little bit of the workload. Now, I do know that some publications have decided to maybe do 2 case studies, which is no problem, but I think it's a good idea to cut back the fat a little bit, given that this is a course, that there is no choice anymore, knowing that if it's done to the level that's so comprehensive that it can answer a question for a student and get full marks, then this is the way we go. So in case anybody doesn't know where Kashmir is or what the story is, we know it's a mountainous region of about 15 million people. So nearly 5 times the population of Ireland, in the Himalayas, north of India, borders Pakistan, and of course, since the 2 countries split basically after 1947, there's been a long running territorial dispute between these 2 nations. And you see, we have a host of timeline of events. Now, these are just the highlights. I mean, there has been many, many more skirmishes between these 2 countries, and of course, it's quite recent and quite current, because even in 2025, after militants attacked tourists in the country, the Indian government blamed Pakistani influence and launched an attack, and then there was obviously reprisals, and of course Donald Trump took credit for standing up afterwards and claimed that he should be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. I wonder, are people thinking that after the events of the last week or so? So obviously here we have an example from our book where we cover it very comprehensively, and you can see it's clearly annotated, and there's lots of detail, and we try to bring in the geo skills through the area of discussion, because obviously, as well as a key competency where there's a number of opportunities for students to communicate, we believe this is really important as well. But obviously, one of the things that makes this such a significant area, and one of great worry, is because when you have 2 nations that are beside each other that both have that are both nuclear powers, if one of them decide to escalate to a point where they can't come back off the precipice, so to speak, we would fear a nuclear attack. Okay, so just briefly, I want to focus on how you might, say, for example, approach teaching the area of learning outcome 3.13, which is the influence of geopolitical superpowers. It's an area that I find that, we'd say, for example, that you could experiment with in your TY class, as a way of prepping them for going into the new Leaving Cert course, because obviously, a lot of transition years come to me and they say, well, what is the new Leaving Cert course like? And you like to give them a little bit of a taster. And a lot of people kind of think about the USA because of the influence it has culturally and every other way on Ireland, indeed. We're looking at Maughan Martin going in next week with a bowl of shamrock to the White House. So we know that it has a huge influence over the English-speaking world. And so, a lot of students might be able to identify with that. So the learning intention here is how we explain how the USA became a global superpower, and how superpowers use both hard and soft power to influence other countries. So what we do here is we look at the rise of the United States and we compare it to the rise of another superpower, which is that of China. So what is a superpower? A country or nation that commands great influence and power over the rest of the world, or otherwise known as a geopolitical force. So if we break it down, if we look at the different sort of elements, so we take, say, the physical nature of the United States, and already you can see, as Tim Marshall referred to, the guy that wrote The Power and Revenge of Geography, he pretty much said that it was impossible to invade, almost impossible to invade. So if you look at sort of the Canadian Shield, which is effectively a permafrost and ice-covered wilderness to the north, the Rocky Mountains to the west, the Mojave Desert to the southwest. And of course, the fact that it can defend or has control of two oceans. It's one of the very few nations on the planet that can claim that. I think even Mexico is the other, but still Mexico shares the ocean on the other side with other borders, whereas the United States are almost exclusively that. This is one of the main reasons why it is such a superpower to begin with. Now, obviously, it is gifted by an abundance of natural resources. There is no shortage of oil. We know that the Mississippi Basin has more navigable rivers than the entire world put together in this area. Hugely fertile area, right from the very north to the south, where it goes out into, should we call it the Gulf of America now, or still the Gulf of Mexico? But either way, it's still a hugely significant reason why the United States has been so powerful for so long. And of course, it's a feared military, navy, and air force superpower with bases all around the world. And you can see from this graphic here, which is effectively an infographic, again, another opportunity for us to bring in the whole area of geoskills, where you can show an infographic. Something like this could easily and readily appear in an exam question as a stimulus, and students then would be asked to kind of comment on it. So you can see that they've got 750 bases, 80 countries, troops deployed in 159 countries. Really, these are not guys to pick a fight with. I think Iran are finding that at the moment. So the influence of superpowers, for example, the hard and soft power, this is how they wield it. Now, I do think that when I was going back, I knew I had skipped a slide. So one of the things that I would have said as well that is really important is that students are kept engaged. And throughout the book, we have nearly, well, in every unit, we have a number of interesting geofacts. So I just wanted to draw your attention to this one because, we talked about the Mississippi Basin. Well, obviously the United States didn't always control the entire area. But in 1803, surprisingly, they actually purchased this entire section of land in the middle in a transaction called the Louisiana Purchase for a mere 15 million from Napoleon's France. So they're estimating that if it was to be sold now, which never would, of course, it would be cost $60 trillion, or to put it another way, it would be a 17 or nearly 18% increase in value. So these are kind of things that we like to bring into the book continuously through the chapters, just to kind of engage students, some little did you know geofact that's there. So back to the influence on superpowers in terms of what is hard and soft power. So I said it already, the idea of using military and economic might. I think the word to compel others to act in your interest is a good one. Obviously, in some ways, if you build up military power, I think I read an article today about the fact that the United States attacking Iran, or Israel attacking Iran, is only giving more, justification to the likes of North Korea for building up their nuclear weapons to deter aggression and to protect their own interests. But you can see this iconic image here. I think it probably appeared in virtually every book and every newspaper of the famous Trump tariffs, where he uses his economic threats, as well as, we'd say, the aircraft carrier, which possibly is somewhere in the Mediterranean or the Gulf at this stage, if not off the coast of Venezuela, last month, to protect the interests of the United States. So obviously China also have their own version of economic hard power. I mean, they control most of the rare earth metals worldwide, and you can see that, and that's something that is not acceptable to the United States anymore, which might be one of the reasons why, apart from other things, they're trying to get their hands on Greenland. Now, so what is soft power then in comparison? Well, it's the ability to attract or persuade others into your own worldview without coercion or force. So we're looking at softer things like culture and political values, and even some foreign policies that you might use to influence other countries' way of thinking. So we've always grown up, certainly in the past of my vintage anyway, of the idea of the American dream, which was portrayed by Hollywood and TV. And so this image here of Coca-Cola from the 1940s is a very, very good example of that, how the Americans have been doing this. More recently, we can see how the Chinese, who have opened up, the Confucius Institute in UCD to kind of try and sort of advertise Chinese culture so that people can understand that. And then I suppose one of the more interesting elements here, which is kind of connected again to what's happening in the Gulf, is that in 2022, everyone was surprised, I suppose, when they did get to host it. But Qatar, tiny little country, very, very gas-rich country, hosted the World Cup. And here you have an image of the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Al Thani, presenting Lionel Messi with a bisht. And of course, it wasn't just because they wanted people to come to Qatar on holidays. In fact, the reason behind it was because Qatar knew well, much the same way as Kuwait in 1990, tiny country, Iran beside it, larger countries like Saudi Arabia and even the United Arab Emirates showing hostility towards it, or certainly unfriendliness, and they wanted to be relevant in the eyes of the world, and felt that it was less easy to attack a country that was prominent. So they bought PSG, for example, and they hosted the World Cup. So this bisht that was presented on stage to Lionel Messi was an attempt by the Emir to show the world that he is present and that he is relevant as well. And obviously then they'd be less likely to be attacked. Now, obviously, things have changed, as I keep saying, in the last week, and this is a dynamic section. And this is what makes it very, very attractive for teachers to teach. You can continuously refer to current affairs in the news. I suppose maybe we're the victims of what they used to say, the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. And we're certainly living in interesting times now. Okay, so just to kind of get into the pedagogical approaches here. So obviously the teaching methodologies that you would use, obviously you'd have to have good content, which we obviously provide in great depth in core. But also, I mean, the book is packed with quite a lot of video clips and other resources. Through what we have a section or a panel in each page, or certainly every second page, investigate further, where you are directed to look at really good quality, relevant video clips like this one here by Maxonomics, which I think is really, really good, where it kind of gives you all the chapter and verse as to why the USA is a superpower and why it's likely to remain one into the future. Very articulate guy, uses lots of big maps and visuals, and humor as well to go with it. I always think storyboards are really, really good. They're highly interactive. I mean, you'll get lots of storyboards on ArcGIS. This is a really good one again on how the USA established itself as a superpower, worth checking out. And as I said, as Anisha said at the outset, anything that is on this video, on this webinar, will be made available to people afterwards. So other things as well that I would use, lots of interactive maps and websites. As I said, Worldometer is very good if you want to do a basic research of data on a particular country or region. This one here, geostrategy.org, while it's part of the Council of Geostrategy from Britain, you can see really interesting kind of thought-provoking maps from this. I mean, this is one here showing all the undersea cables that's connected from Ireland and Britain to other parts of the world. And of course, up until recently enough, a lot of people were worried about sabotage, that Russia might sabotage these cables by dragging some kind of equipment along them to cut us off. Our transactions, banking transaction communications all depend on the internet. And one of the ones that I really like, and it's very good for students to kind of get them thinking in terms of, to stimulate discussion again, is MapDis. While it's ran by Google Gemini, and I know some people have kind of their own ideas about AI, it's brilliant for quantifying sort of the level of diplomacy between different countries. So, for example, if you click on Ireland and then you click on Spain, it'll tell you that the rating of friendliness between these two countries is very, very high. Obviously, if you click on Ireland, you click on Israel, not so friendly. And then obviously the other ranking then is hostile. And just as I said, only last week, I think before the USA and Iran finally, went down to battle, we in a TY class just put this up and we clicked on both of them, and it rated the likelihood of war between these two places or regions as extremely high. So a very, very good website to try and, to use just as a kind of a way of introducing the topic. Because remember, what is diplomacy? It is the interactions between different nations and regions. Other discussion stimuluses that are always very good. I mean, always to try and bring students sort of connections with their own kind of environment. So this is one that we have in the book again, where we look at the scoring in the Eurovision and how that might connect in some way to geopolitics. And we know that Russia was obviously expelled in 2022. We know that Ireland, obviously withdrew themselves, RTE withdrew themselves because of the presence of Israel, and how that might come to pass as a discussion. So obviously other things that we look at is newspaper extracts, always very good for discussion and questions. We also have a lot of comprehensive case studies as well. So finally, I just want to talk just briefly about assessment. We know, as we said at the outset, that the written examination is worth 60% of the Leaving Cert, and that these will be out. We think that the question or the exam will probably be worth around 300 marks out of a total of 5 and 2 hours, 30 minutes long. We know that there'll be a range of question types. I know some people are saying that they think that there mightn't be essays. Well, trust me, with something as comprehensive and as wide-ranging as the Leaving Cert, there'll be plenty of opportunities for students, both ordinary level and higher level, to give themselves an opportunity to show what they've learned, and certainly to apply both their geographical thinking and skills, as well as their prior knowledge of all the different subject areas. And that will come to the fore pretty soon, as we can say. So just as I said, these are examples of questions. So it could range from the short questions, obviously, to the more mid-range questions based on maybe some kind of a stimulus, like an article or a piece from like Tim Marshall's Power of Geography here. The why questions, the how questions, sort of the kind of the abstract thinking, to something more like, akin to the essay style. So like geopolitics is the interrelationship between geography. And of course, in every unit of the chapters in the book, we include sample answers. As I said, I'm an experienced Leaving Cert geography examiner, so I know what a good high quality sample answer would look like. So we include these in it. And also in the skills book as well, we show you how to do an exam an exam skills builder. We have that as well, where we show you how a question like this is broken down and how to actually go about writing it. So finally, I just hope that, this was a quick, obviously, run through. Everything that we talked about here is obviously gone much more in depth in the book in core. But I do hope that you found this webinar useful and that it went some way to clarifying any doubts or concerns you may have had on teaching the topics of geopolitics. It is, like all units, covered, as I said, in greater depth in core. And if you're still undecided, you should know that core is a complete, structured, exam-focused package providing thorough support for each strand and learning outcome. We also have, obviously, the digital supports through comprehensive PowerPoints. We have solutions to all the answers. We have lots of quizzes for each unit. We include exam questions and sample answers in the textbook, as well as a dedicated exam skills builder, as I just mentioned, in the skills book. Now, there's also step-by-step support for the Applied Geography project as well. And I should say as well that there's an opportunity to build towards this, because in each unit we also have an Applied Geography project activity that's relevant to most units, that gets teachers out into the field, which is also very, very, I think it's unique to ours. And students can build up their skills as we go along. But I just want to say thanks so much for hearing us out and for listening. And I do hope you found this useful. And now we're going to hand over to Anita for any questions that you might have. So thank you very, very much.
Liam, thank you. You packed a lot of information into a very tight enough time frame. So well done. Really, really informative and really valuable and practical knowledge, I felt, supporting teachers with the teaching of that new topic of geopolitics. I'm just going to invite Valerie back on screen with us. Valerie, are you there for us? You are? Great.
Yeah.
Lovely. You're welcome. Lovely. So I'm just going to jump straight in because we have a little over 10 minutes just left. So I'm going to give you a break for a second and say that one of the common questions that we got asked was, when can I get a sample? So I guess just to let you know that reps are out and about in schools at the moment. They've got a printed 2-in-1 sampler of the book and the project and exam skills book for you, and that has units from the textbook and, as I say, that project and exam skills book that Liam spoke about. So you're able to, review the book and see what it's going to be like and look at all of the features that Liam spoke to. The full package will be available in July, and it'll be out into schools in good time for when you return in August. And if in the meantime as well you want to go online on gileducation.ie now, you can see those samples of the textbook and the project and exam skills book, and also samples of the digital resources online for you there now. So please do pop online to see that. Valerie, if you're ready, I am just going to dive into the questions, if that's okay. So Sarah asked, what areas of this topic, geopolitics, do I need to focus on?
Well, Sarah, so thank you, Liam. Liam touched on kind of all the key points, but what I would say, Sarah, is when you look at the specification, and that was what we followed, just to the letter of the law. So there are 3 learning outcomes in geopolitics, and 3.12 to 3.13 and 3.14. And they're on the specification. But as a teacher, what I would be looking very carefully at is what's in the left-hand column on the specification. And this is where they break down the learning outcomes into kind of easier language, I think, to understand, and into more bite-sized pieces. So on the left side, then it's broken down into 5 different areas that students need to learn about in geopolitics. And that's exactly then how the chapter in the book is structured based on that breakdown. At the start of every chapter, then you'll notice that the learning outcomes are numbered, what each chapter deals with. And again, the learning intentions are written according to the learning outcomes. So in core, there's no room for mistakes there, because the learning outcomes and what the students learn about are very, very clearly outlined at the start of the chapter. So I hope that answers that question, Sarah.
Sounded very succinct and very clear for me. Valerie, thank you very much. This is one that we got from a number of people, but I'm going to put John's wording on it, and he basically just asks, what's new and what's different with the new spec? Can you speak a little bit to that, Valerie?
Okay, so I suppose the first thing, John, is no more choice, nor more option. So everything you see in the textbook in core is everything the student has to know going into their leaving certificate. So how the structure is different. So now we have 4 strands. So core starts out with that unifying strand where, we work on the skills and develop the skills and the techniques that students will need. And then those skills are woven throughout each of the 3 strands. So you have a lot in common with the old physical geography. You'll see a lot of topics there that you'll already have been familiar with. In the human environment, then it's very much that social geography, population, migration, etc. And then in the global environment, you're looking at a lot of economic chapters, and then like the geopolitics and globalization. Now that will feel new to the old leaving cert, absolutely. But what I would say is that it won't be new so much to the student, because any student who has come through junior cycle geography, it's the leaving cert now is very much building on that base, on that knowledge that they have from junior cycle, but it's taking it to another level, and it's taking it to a deeper level and a deeper level of understanding and critical thinking and analysis. So for the student who enjoyed junior cycle geography, they're going to get much the same. Now, there are new things added, of course, and some things have been slimmed down, but very similar junior cycle and senior cycle. The old idea of all the European case studies, that's pretty much gone. The way the specification is now, they require a lot of looking at Ireland, of course, and then there's a lot of a global south or a global north case study of your choice. So in core, we have spread our wings. We're all around the world. Like you'll see there, Liam mentioned the US, China, India, Kashmir. And so that's what's really lovely now about this new specification. It's really a global insight into geography. Yeah.
And that's actually a nice positive link that you make back to the junior cycle, that students mightn't find it as big a change. So that might even ease the road a little bit for teachers. But I guess I'm not a geography teacher, but what I hear you saying is there's no choice. Everything has to be covered. Fills me with a little bit of dread. I can only imagine it's filling teachers with a certain amount of apprehension. So I think, is it fair to say that in core, if I can go back to it for a moment, like there is no choice in what they have to study, but everything is done for them in the package. Teachers can really hit the ground running with this package and knowing that they have the confidence to just start teaching this straight away in September. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. It's all laid out. I mean, it's pretty much going to hold their hand the whole way. And a lot of what we fear and what we dread is just simply what we don't know. And when you have a good look at it, have a close look at it, and you'll see you're actually familiar with all these topics already. And what you're not familiar with, don't worry. We have it covered in such depth. It's all there at your fingertips. So every step of the way. And then to back it up, then we have a skills book now to go with the textbook. So it's to keep the student, we feel that, it's harder to keep their attention now. So to keep them engaged, to promote active learning, the skills book really engages students and helps them to apply their learning and make it more relevant and bring what's in the textbook, bring it to reality through skills and through activities. So good ways of changing up the tempo within your class from just kind of lecture, talk to, lots of student activities to engage.
And the skills book, of course, will have those sample exam questions in it, isn't that correct also?
Yeah, and exam builders. So with tips, scaffolded, answers, helping the student, guiding them to break down the question and how to go about answering it. Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant, great. So I'm going to run another one here, and it could be a little bit of a one for you, but I'm just going to bring it in. Eva asks, are there any guidelines on the GI, so on the Applied Geography project that you mentioned?
Oh, Eva, that's a big question now at this hour of the night. What I would say is the Applied Geography project, I wouldn't do it justice now in 1 minute trying to answer that, Eva. So I won't even try. But what I will say is like that's a webinar in itself. But what I will say is, and I'm really proud to say this, like the last chapter in core is fully dedicated to the Applied Geography project, so that every step of the way, like it's structured to guide the student and of course the teacher, because we need that assistance right now too, through their project and how to go about it. It breaks it down, each of the different sections and what's needed and what's required. And of course, then throughout the book, we'll have looked at, samples or ideas for applied geography projects as relevant to each topic as it comes up throughout the chapter. So you're not waiting till the very end. It'll have been in the back of your mind all throughout as you're moving through the course.
And then I think you mentioned it already, but no harm to just highlight it here again, that you're dealing with the skills needed for the project in that unifying strand opener in the book. Isn't that correct? Like that you're building the skills all the way through. So when it comes to the project, it will hopefully be easier for students to get their head around it.
Absolutely. And like the very first chapter is why geography matters, so you're showing the student the relevance, the importance of geography, and then the skills and how it's applied to everyday life and real world issues going on around us at the moment. So those skills, we set the scene at the start of the book, give them the basics, build the foundation, and then build on top of that through each strand. And then it's like bringing the masterpiece then together at the end with the Applied Geography project chapter at the very end, where all the student has learned throughout now comes together and it's all tied together at the very end.
And I guess important just to mention the online teacher resources as well, Valerie, just that the support is there throughout for whatever part of the course they're working with, or the book or the package or the skills book or whatever. The online teacher resources are there, and I assume there's editable plans and stuff in there for them to work on.
Big time. So it's not just PowerPoints for the classroom. We like them, we expect them. But what's a big advantage now is going back in August or in September, we have plans done. Download them, put your school crest onto it, edit them, fiddle around with them, whatever way suits your teaching, your students, your school. And it's done. And that's a huge mountain of work done now that and then as you're moving, it's a working document. So as you're moving through the course and as you're getting better at it and more familiar with it from one year to the next, you just edit it and change it to suit your style and your needs.
Great. Thanks, Valerie. Guys, we've only got a couple of minutes left. I see more questions coming in. We're not going to get to those this evening, but we will get to you with any questions that we didn't get to. We get answers to you. You just need to give us a couple of weeks because we compile everything together. And if we have to get back to Liam or Valerie or check out the answer in house for you, it can just take us a little time to gather those, but we will get them back to you. So just keep an eye on your inbox. But tomorrow, however, you will receive an email with a recording of this evening's webinar, with the link to the website where you can sample Core Online, as mentioned to you, and sample the digital resources for the programme as well. And then one important thing to mention, that the Unifying Strand section that Valerie has referred to quite a bit, and I think Liam mentioned it as well, will be up online after St. Patrick's Day. So that's kind of the end of next week, if you just remember to go back in and check on that. And sorry, in that email as well, there will be a link to find your local rep. So I think that kind of is us for this evening. Valerie, I never got a chance to thank you very much for that really clear answering of those questions. Liam, again, thank you very much for a really brilliant, depressing presentation, but a good presentation nonetheless. We have to wake up, I guess, to what's going on. So thank you for bringing us through all of that. So thank you, everybody, for